Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video, we'll be editing one of my Milky Way images, which was shot in Spiti Valley at Kaza. We'll be editing this image step by step in order to know some of the steps from my Milky Way editing workflow. So stay tuned and let's get started. So let's have a look at the before and after of this image. This is before and we'll edit it into this. So we'll have a look at how it's done exactly. So for that we'll be needing Lightroom and Photoshop. We'll be editing this image in two parts. We'll be editing a separate image for the foreground part of the image, and the sky part, that is the Milky Way part, will be edited separately. Mostly that's how we Milky Way photographers edit our images, because it becomes a lot more easier to gain control over foreground and background separately and then merge them together to get a cleaner file. So that's how we do it, or that's how I do it. So let's get started with the Lightroom part. So here we are in Lightroom and we need to import our raw file into Lightroom. For that, we'll click on import. So I have my folder on desktop and the folder's name is tutorial. I'll select the raw file. You see this tick mark here, so this is the raw file for the image, and I'll click on import. So this will import the raw file in Lightroom, and when I click on develop, I'm ready to edit my Milky Way image. So in this image, please totally ignore the sky part. Whatever we'll be doing is for the foreground part. So whatever happens with the sky doesn't matter. It won't be added in the final output. So let it be and just start editing the foreground part. So right now the foreground is very dark. I need to add some exposure to the foreground. I will not lift up shadows, but instead I like to add exposure to it. All right. So I guess this much of exposure is fine. Again, ignore this part. Whatever happens with the sky is not important at this time. We are just focusing on the foreground. Now I have added some exposure, but as you can see, there is some magenta cast in the foreground. Now I need to deal with this cast. For that, I'll go in HSL tab, and in HSL I'll go in hue. In hue, I'll bring down this hue of magenta and make it purple. Alright, now it's more towards the purplish side. I'll go to saturation and I'll reduce the saturation of purple and magenta. You see a lot of magenta and purple cast in the area is already starting to disappear. You can see the difference by clicking on this. You see, that's the difference it has made. So although the image is quite a lacking saturation, but that's fine. This was shot at night and a bit of low saturation is kind of okay for the image. But right now there's a lot of noise in this area. So in order to reduce this noise, I'll go down to sharpening, noise reduction and sharpening tab. In noise reduction, I'll increase the luminance to 40. Alright, so it has made it pretty lost of sharpness. So we'll add some sharpness here. We'll add some sharpness. By clicking on Alt key, I'll bring up the masking option. So this shows whatever area is the details being added. So right now, in this part, the details are being added. So that's fine. It is perfectly fine to me, but I guess I need to reduce the luminance. It's a bit too much. So I'll reduce a bit luminance. Then I'll go to the basic tab and I like to add some shadows. The whites look perfectly fine. I'll reduce some of the blacks, so it adds a bit of contrast there, and a bit of saturation since we have a lot of saturation reduced on that part. And I guess this looks pretty much fine. I'll export the foreground file by clicking on File, Export. So I'll choose the folder. It's on my desktop, Tutorials, select folder. I'll like to rename the file, so I'll rename it foreground.jpg, and I like to keep all the changes as it is and just export the file by clicking on export. So this will export my file, and now we'll be looking at what happens with the Milky Way part in Photoshop. So let's head on to Photoshop. So here I am in Photoshop and we are going to edit the Milky Way part of the image in the Photoshop. For that you need to open both the foreground and the Milky Way file in Photoshop. So this is my raw file and this is my foreground file. I'll click on open and this will open the foreground and the raw file of the Milky Way in Photoshop. So this is the raw file and this is the foreground file. From this image I'll be taking just the foreground part and adding to this image in order to get a good foreground. For that I'll just duplicate the layer here by clicking on Ctrl J. So I press Ctrl J to get a duplicate of the background layer in order to be sure. So if I need to roll back my changes, I can just get to this background layer and get all the changes that I have. So I'll rename this layer to sky and I'll go to foreground, press Ctrl A, Ctrl C. So I've copied this and come here and paste Ctrl V. So by pressing Ctrl V, I've got this foreground image into this image as another layer. So I'll rename this to foreground. Okay, this is foreground. Now I need to remove this part, the sky part in the foreground, in order to get the sky part of this image. For that we are using a technique called as masking. Now I'll be doing a very rough mask here because this tutorial is mostly for beginners who are just starting with Milky Way editing. So I'll just click on this mask here. So whatever is in the white in this mask is visible, and when I click on B, that gives me brush and I have black as the top color here. And when I start to paint black on this white mask by clicking here, I just start painting here with black color, so that removes whatever is in this section. Just have a look at the mask and here. So it is removing all the part that is in the white. So this method is very useful because if I want to roll back the changes, I can just click here, that changes the color here. I need to select the mask and then click. So if I want to roll back all my changes, I can easily do it this way. Yeah, and all my changes are back, but I'll brush it back with black, and that's how you replace your sky. Now usually this process is done by using luminosity mask, but I'm using a normal mask here without luminosity masks. So this gave me a pretty rough selection and I'm good to go with this. Alright, so that's how you replace your foreground. This is usually done using luminosity mask, but since this tutorial is for beginners, we are not getting into details of the luminosity mask. So I can still see there is some magenta cast present over here. So I'll just click on this. This is new adjustment layer and click on hue saturation. Click on this icon here and select this area which is magentas. You see it recognizes the area as magentas. Bring down a bit of saturation. That's look pretty good. And you can check the changes here by clicking on the eyeball. So it has removed a pretty much of magenta from this area. Now I'll be clicking on this icon. This icon will link down this hue saturation layer to the foreground layer that is exactly below it. So that's what this icon does. So now I'll merge both the layers by right clicking and merge layers. So that has merged the layers, and that's my sky part, and this is my foreground. Alright, for now I'll place the foreground below sky. We'll be editing the sky part. So for editing the sky part, what I usually do is create contrast in the Milky Way. So to create contrast, we'll be using curves here. I'll click on this new adjustment layer, add curves. So this is where we'll be creating curves. So I like to create contrast between the darks and the whites of the Milky Way, so you can easily identify this area in the Milky Way. This looks like a horse, and this is called as the black horse of the Milky Way. I'll click on this icon, select a dark part here. You see it adds a point here or a key here to start for the dark parts, and I'll click on a bright area in the vicinity of this. Don't go towards this part because this is too bright, and we need to reduce the brightness in this part. But you see, this is the whites and this is the blacks. Now I'll create a contrast between the darks and the whites by creating a S curve using these 2 points. So I click on this point and drag it down a bit, click on this point and drag it up a bit, and create a S shape to give contrast to this image. So this S curve added some contrast in the background. You can click on the eyeball icon and check what happened to the Milky Way. So just ignore whatever happens in this part because already we have created another foreground layer for this, which will be replaced afterwards. So this looks pretty good to me, but I feel the contrast is a bit too much, so I'll just click on the curves layer and reduce a bit of opacity. So I'll bring this down to maybe 75%, and that's good to me. Now I'll create some more contrast by using levels. So I'll bring this up a bit, that adds a bit of brightness to the Milky Way, and drag this down a bit. So that has created some more contrast there. I'll create another layer for hue saturation, increase the overall saturation, go to yellows, add a bit of yellow saturation, go to blues, and a bit of blues look good. Go to magentas, add a bit of magentas because this part right here is actually in magentas range, and I guess this is pretty much fine. This looks good. We have some good contrast. I'll create a vibrance layer, add a bit of vibrance there, and this is starting to look good. Okay, so if I click on the foreground layer and press it on the top, and this looks a bit nice, but the foreground still has a too much exposure. So I'll click on brightness contrast, reduce the brightness, and link down the layer to the foreground layer, and it's good. Again, I'll select both the layers and merge layers. Again, rename the layer to foreground, and I have renamed the layer to foreground, and this looks pretty much good. So this is what I do in my Milky Way workflow. So this is a part of my Milky Way workflow. From further on, you can add your touch-ups. You can do whatever you like in this region. Maybe do some noise reduction or do some star reduction, add some more color contrast, and do some toning. Alright, so talking about toning, I guess we can do some toning here by clicking on color balance. I'll add a bit of yellows, a bit of magenta, add a bit of reds, and that looks good. It has given a bit of yellowish tone in the shadows. I'll add blues because shadows are mostly bluish at night because of the white balance, and in the highlights I'll also add a bit of blue. Alright, so that looks good. So that's how I edit my Milky Way images. Now I'll do some touch-ups for my side, and let's have a look how the Milky Way looks like after I do some of my touch-ups. Alright, so I have added some of the touch-ups to the image that we just edited, and this is how the image looks like after touch-ups. I have made another group called as Touchups, and if you just click on the eyeball icon, you can see what touching up I have done in this image. You can see the image looks a bit softer because I have added a glowy effect, or the auto glow effect that we called it, and it made the image a bit softer, but it also lost some of the details in the Milky Way, so I have to create another layer for the details, and I have done some high pass in the Milky Way to get some details back. But overall the image looks perfectly fine to me. This touch-ups is kind of a personal thing that every photographer has and adds to the image. So this is the final output. Now I'll just export the image or save the image in my folder. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. This was about how I edit my Milky Way images or how I post process my Milky Way images. I'll make a separate video for the pre-processing part of this image. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.